So speaking of money, we're starting a new series today called Money Talks. Now, I don't know about you, but this is what I want you to do. Online and in the room, I want you to come up with, right now, a voice for your money so that when we talk about your money talking, you can hear it talking to you. Like in my house, we had this dog named Odie. He died a few years ago. And even today, when we talk about Odie, he kind of sounds like this. I'm not real for sure, but this was just Odie's voice. And everybody in the house talks about Odie that way. Like remember when Odie would, oh, I really want some steak now, or whatever, he has that voice. I don't know why, but I want your money to have a voice. If your money could talk to you, what would it sound like? Would it sound like a financial advisor that has a calculator out? Well, Jill, you see, if you just put this much money at 4.3% interest in, if you're a financial advisor and you don't sound like that, that's okay. But maybe your money has that real, highbrow voice to it. Or maybe your money sounds like a disappointed parent. I told you if you just spent me wisely, this wouldn't happen. Get the voice for your money. Because here's what I think is amazing. When you think if your money could talk, and could tell you some things about itself, I happen to think that your money would actually sound like Jesus when he did talk about money. I think money would line more up with Jesus than it would your disappointed parents, your nagging spouse, or your financial advisor. I think when we hear it talk, if we could just hear it talk, when Jesus did talk about money, I think our money would agree with him more often than not. When we talk about money, part of the reason why we're engaging this conversation, last September, I started to hear the whispers about new economics, and it could be is it just conspiracy theory? The whispers of a coming recession were there. Whispers of inflation were coming. By January, the conversation's full blown. By March, we're seeing interest rates rise. If you bought a home in January at $300,000, you could get a 3% interest rate. To buy that home today is 6%. Same home, same income, nothing changed, but the interest rate changed, which means you're going to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars more for that home in the long run. We've heard about inflation. We're hearing about the everything bubble popping. If you listen to financial news, you're hearing things like the de-dollarization of the globe. Most of global trade is based on the American dollar, and there are nations who are going, why does America get to tell us what to do? Let's change the script. And they are. And they're trading within themselves. And then last month, if you heard about it, our government changed its economy too, to FedNow. Have you heard about FedNow? Go do a Google search, FEDNOW. You'll see it soon enough. And all this stuff is changing. But then, compounded with that, are people, even with financial recovery pieces, your tax refund wasn't as awesome as you thought it was going to be. Someone has to pay for stimulus checks. All these pieces are shifting. What do we do? The current situation of America is that we're in debt up to our eyeballs, both nationally and individually. Most people don't have a plan for their money and what to do with it. And they feel the stress. Even today, money is still the number one fight of divorce causes in the United States. There are people who are just begging the Supreme Court to rule in their favor so their student loans can be paid off. So what do you do with all this tension of money? And then, if you're a senior citizen, how long before you use that phrase, I only live on a limited income? Anybody ever use that phrase or hear people talk on that phrase? I feel like we all have limited incomes. But what do you do with it? What if I told you your limited income may have unlimited potential? What would you do then? What would you do if I said, what would you do with all the extra money you had laying around the house? And you're like, bro, I got no extra money laying around the house. I remember when Corey and I were first married, we had been married about a year, and she was working at a salon. I worked for a church. We would come home for lunch, and there were days, seriously, there were days, like if we could find enough change in the couch, we could go on a date to Taco Bell. And we would scrounge up whatever coins we could find everywhere, and we could get 2 bean burritos with extra onions and sour cream. That was like when we were like really stretching it. And I think it cost us like $1.75, and we were going out to eat. Good old days, right, Corey? So how do you process that? I mean, even the way we think about money today tells us that something's wrong, right? When you think about how we deal with money, the way we handle our money is an indication that something is wrong. I mean, my phone died this week. I got the dreaded Samsung black screen of death, and all you Apple users like say, yeah, I told you. Now, before you tell me, Apple users, my daughter's iPhone died the other day too. Whole different conversation. So I take it to get it repaired, and the person says to me, don't you just want to get a new phone? And I said, well, the new phone is going to be like $800, but we can cut you a deal. But it's still going to cost me $800 with zero down. It's $800 now or later, so $800, right? And to fix it will be $50. So I think I just want to fix it. Oh. Because it can be fixed. I mean, how many of the time do you go, something's wrong with my stuff, and so I got to do something about it. And so we'll go in and we'll rip out sinks and refrigerators and ovens and stoves and microwaves and tile and cabinets, and we'll replace it with more refrigerators and microwaves and ovens and stoves and cabinets. When there was nothing wrong with the other stuff, we just didn't like the way it looked anymore. Or because your car has that odor. By the way, you probably put that odor in your car, just saying. But because your car has that odor, now you got to get a new car. But the engine's fine, the tires are fine, the brakes are fine. Nothing's wrong with the car. You just don't like the way it smells anymore. Like the way we handle our money indicates to us that something is wrong. Like there's a fundamental thing about it that goes, what's going on? Like, how many possible drills does one man need? Don't say that about fishing poles, though. I mean, because you need one for spinner baits, and you need one for you need one for everything at that point, right? But the way we handle our money indicates that something's wrong. So how do we figure this out and start lining ourselves up in a way that's going to make some sense? Money would tell you this. If money could speak to you today, the very first thing it would say is, I can add meaning to life, but I am not the meaning of life. I can add meaning to life, but I'm not the meaning of life. We can't confuse those two things, because there are some of us who treat money like it is the meaning of life. If we just got some more, life would be better. Dave Ramsey, who is a financial expert, will tell you money only amplifies what's already there. If you're a mean person, if you got a lot of money, you'll just be more mean. If you're a wasteful person, if you had more money, guess what you're going to do? You're going to waste more money. How many professional athletes and lottery winners do you see that are broke within years of that payment coming out? It just squanders. I can add meaning to life, but I'm not the meaning of life. That's what money would tell you today, if it could speak. We start thinking about money in this like being a means to an end is what makes anything meaningful. If money was the end, like that's the whole definition of meaningful, right? Like something that has meaning, if money was the end, no meaning, it's just money for money's sake, or stuff for stuff's sake, there's no meaning to it. The whole reason you want grandma's cabinet is not because the cabinet was awesome. It's because grandma was awesome and she loved that cabinet. Like for all that you could accumulate, your stuff will be here after you are. Like money can't be the end. But when you make it meaningful, now money has something to say about itself. But it can't be the end. It's like the Segway. Did anybody ever buy a Segway? Of all the people I've known one person who actually bought a Segway. I can't even get my wife to go touring on them when we go to a different city. We should take the Segway tour. No. But it'd be so cool. These are pretty cool too. Segway was cool. You could get on and go down a city street, and then what would it be? But no one found a real meaning for Segways. They were meaningless. Cool contraption, no meaning to it. They never caught on. I mean, you have feet, you have bicycles, you have Uber. Who needs a Segway, right? You can get from place to place. Completely meaningless. And when things don't have meaning, they don't have value. What gives anything value is that it has meaning, and that's what we got to wrestle with. So when you decide with your money and with your life to be a means and not an end, your money will go beyond you also. Sometimes we make ourselves the end, and when everything begins and ends with me, there's not a whole lot of meaning to life. It's just you. But when you decide that you are going to be a means yourself, your money comes along with you. And it goes beyond you too. And that's what we want to get into today, is how do we get beyond just this? So I want to invite you to a parable that Jesus tells. A parable is a story that is used to illustrate a point. This is found in Luke chapter 16, and it's the parable of the dishonest manager. So hear the word of the Lord this morning, beginning in verse 1. Now Jesus said to his disciples, "There was a rich man who received an accusation that his manager was squandering his possessions." So when you see a parable, right up front, Jesus tells you exactly the first line of the story. You don't have to guess where the story's going up front. He's going to tell you who is in it and what it's about. There was a man who found out that his manager was being dishonest. So now we've got some tension, and an accusation comes against the dishonest man. So he called the manager in, and he asked, "What is this that I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you can no longer be my manager. Just so you know, I'm firing you, and before you get fired, I want an account of everything you just did, and then you're fired." The man panics. Says the manager says to himself, "What will I do since my master is taking the management away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I'm removed from management, people will welcome me into their homes." So he's trying to figure himself out. He doesn't care about his manager's money. He cares about himself. So he calls each person in, everybody who owed the master money. He says, "How much do you owe my master?" The person says, 100 measures of olive oil. He says, "Take your invoice, sit down quickly, and write 50. You don't have to pay the full 100. Just give me 50. We're going to be okay." The guy's like, "Really? Yeah, go for it. I'm the manager. We can do it." He asks the next person, "How much do you owe?" 100 measures of wheat. Take your invoice and write down 80. Now, not everybody's getting an equal break here, but that manager's starting to put some stuff together, and they're going, "Oh, okay. I'll take the break." The master praised the unrighteous manager because he acted shrewdly. What? The master praised him because he's acting shrewdly. Jesus then says, "The children of this age are more shrewd than the children of light when dealing with their own people. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of worldly wealth, so that when it fails, they may welcome you into eternal dwellings. Whoever is faithful in very little is also faithful in much, and whoever is unrighteous in very little is also unrighteous in much. So if you have not been faithful with worldly wealth, who will trust you with what is genuine? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to someone else, who will give you what is your own? No servant can serve two masters. Either he will hate one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. The dishonest manager. Some amazing things that come out of this story that Jesus tells. When we start to unpack it, one of the things that we see, according to Jesus, money is a means. It's not the end. It's a means. Right? The dishonest manager is cutting off the top to get a debt to benefit himself. But listen to what Jesus says. He sums all that up. And he says, I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of worldly wealth, so that when it fails, they can welcome you into your heavenly reward. Jesus is telling you up front, money is not an end. It will fail. Your stuff will fail. However, you can use that stuff to build relationships, to make life matter in terms of how we relate to others, to do something beyond yourself so that when your money does fail, they will welcome you in. Money is a means. Money's not the end. Do you know what happens if you die with $3 million in your 401k? You die. Period. Do you know what happens if you die and you have the rarest collection of Mickey Mouse toys on the planet? You die. Your stuff will be here after you are gone. So what do you do with the stuff? Money is a means, Jesus says. Money's a tool, not a treasure. It's a tool. We can't confuse those two things. When we start to see it as the treasure and not the tool, everything starts to fall apart. Tools were made to be used. If I had tools that could do a job, but I just left my tools in the package and in the box, the job would never get done. I could call my friends over who were more skilled and say, look at all these tools that I have. Are you going to do the work? No, I was hoping you would use your tools to do the work. Because I want mine to keep looking good. This is a really good-looking hammer, a really good-looking saw. Why don't you use your tools? Because your tools are already messed up. I don't want to use mine. But money and stuff, it's a tool. It's not a treasure. It's a means. Jesus also says that money is a test. Did you hear the test in the passage? Whoever is faithful in very little will be faithful over much. Whoever is righteous in little is unrighteous in much. So if you've not been faithful with worldly wealth, who will trust you with what is genuine? Money is also a test. Like Jesus says some stuff here that I don't really know what to do with. Like I have concluded a few things in my life, and one of those things in my life is that Jesus knows far more about eternity in heaven than I do. Jesus knows far more about coming back from the dead and living again than I do. I can read about what Jesus did it. Right? Like he came from heaven, he lived on earth, he died, he rose, he went back to heaven, and he tells us some things. I don't know what he means when he says, use your worldly wealth to make friends so they can welcome you, not to their home, but into your eternal dwelling. What? How does that work? Like Jesus is correlating that the work that we do with our treasure should directly impact eternity in the lives of others. That when our money is a means, it should directly impact the eternal value of someone else. But if we make money all about ourselves, then we've also taken away that eternal responsibility as well. Money's a test. What will you do with it? How can you be trusted with what's genuine? Jesus doesn't even compare, like sometimes we think, like when we hear Jesus say this, like most of the time we say, well, if I'm faithful with a low salary, God will give me a higher salary and I'll be faithful with that too. That's not what Jesus is saying. He's saying, how can you be trusted with what's genuine? If you can't handle your earthly treasure, how will you handle eternity in your life and someone else's? I don't get it. But the guy who comes from eternity is saying it. I don't understand the correlation, but Jesus does. He's the one who makes the rule. He's the one who lays it out for us. So when I sit back on it, I have to look at that and go, in this test, Jesus, how do I be responsible for what actually matters to you? And our money is a test that affirms that conversation. And so Jesus tells us then that we have limited time and limited opportunity, so make the most of it. And this isn't YOLO FOMO kind of stuff, right? Some of you, I did not speak a foreign language just then. This is not YOLO FOMO kind of stuff. There's something more happening. YOLO is like you only live once. In the Christian framework, you only die once. That's awesome. Which means we have limited time. And FOMO is the fear of missing out. Some of us are so afraid we're going to miss out on something that we just keep everything for ourselves. I love to travel. I love to see things. I love to experience new cultures, new cuisines, new people, new stuff, new nature. I love to see that stuff. But if I didn't go anywhere else for the rest of my life, I'm going to be okay. Because one day, we're going to be touring the new heavens and the new earth. And I'm not going to miss out on anything. But I can go see the rusted, broken stuff now if I want to. But what am I afraid of missing out on? We have a limited time, and we have a limited opportunity. What will you do with what you have? That's the question we get down to. We have a limited time and a limited opportunity. When Jesus tells this story about the dishonest manager, that guy had limited time. I want an account of everything you've done, and then you're no longer my manager. His time was cut short. Limited. He knew he had no other skills. I can't dig. I've had children who have said the same thing. But I think it's a whole different conversation. Maybe he just didn't want to dig. But he says he can't dig. He's got no skills to go forward. What am I going to do? I know I'm going to schmooze my way into people's lives. He had a limited opportunity. Time was ticking. So he started making the most of his opportunity, and he was praised for it. The master praised him for it. We have limited time, limited opportunity. Use worldly wealth for kingdom good. That's what it gets down to. I don't think that means you can't enjoy stuff. But I do think it means to use what you have to advance the kingdom in people's lives. Whatever that is. You have a patio and a fire pit? Invite your neighbors over. Roast some marshmallows together. Are they Muslim neighbors? Don't get pork hot dogs. It's okay. You can invite them over, eat a beef hot dog. Don't tell Nate Beck, but I like beef better. I have a neighbor, he's Buddhist, his wife died. I went and found out what does it mean to pay respect in a Buddhist atmosphere? What would I take him? Flowers or fruit? I bought beautiful flowers that he could have in honor of his wife. You know, we can use our wealth for kingdom good, enter into people's lives. That's what it really gets down to. So the challenge today is to turn stuff into story. So I want to show you something. You have this card, and this thing, like, I think this thing could be an impact maker in your life and mine. But you got to start with the front. The Bible says without vision, people perish, right? And so the front is about vision. Like, if you could tell any story about you, if anything could be said about you, what would that story be? How would you turn your stuff into a story? If you had the funds to do something beyond yourself, what would you do? I remember driving on a mesa in New Mexico, and there was all this land that was for sale. It wasn't pretty land. It was a beautiful landscape, but the land itself wasn't beautiful. It's on top of desert, and there's just rocks everywhere, but there's all this land for sale. I remember driving with Corey, and I told her, you know what? If I could afford it, I would buy a house that had 13 bedrooms on one side and 13 bedrooms on the other, and a giant living space in between. And we would take in as many teenagers as we could who were in foster and adoption systems, and we would just love them like crazy. And all these people would live here, and all these people would live there, guys on one side, like a Christian camp, right? It was like going to camp. And no mixed bathing. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Right? But we would, and then as people got out of our house, we would have like the biggest Thanksgiving table ever. We'd always invite the people back. And then once a bedroom was empty, we would fill it with somebody else. I have never had the money to buy that ranch. But since that time, we've had numbers of young people who don't belong to us live with us, be loved by us, be cared for by us. I mean, I have those funds, but if I had those funds, wouldn't that be awesome? So if I can't do that, what can I do? If you don't have vision, it's all going to fall apart. So this front piece is all about your vision. What stories would you want told? How would you want to impact the world? Because you can. Most of us feel like we can't, but you can. The backside is going, how would you fuel that? You've got some decisions to make. And Jesus doesn't let us walk away from him without making decisions. So simple math. What's your total income? What are your financial commitments? What are you paid for? Do you have anything left over? Some of you may not have anything left over right now. That's a whole different conversation. We'll get to that. But if you got something left over, what are you going to do with it? That's the question. If you have an available cash flow, how much of that cash flow are you willing to decide right now to make a difference in eternity for somebody? And I'm not even talking about giving to the church. Jesus talked a lot about money and never asked people for any of it. He said, what will you do with your life? Go do that. Turn it into a prayer. Start working it out. Turn stuff into stories. The question we have to ask is, how can I leverage more of what I have as a means that goes beyond me? Maybe you don't have available cash right now. But again, maybe you got some stuff. Maybe you have some available time. Maybe you have some available space. You can start taking meals to people who can't get out of their house. Maybe you find a connection to volunteer and you go work with people in the community who need you to be next to them. Rather than taking that extra long staycation for yourself, you invest in someone else. How can I leverage more of what I have as a means to go beyond me? We have to ask that question. If you believe in Jesus, you have to ask that question. And more than ask it, you have to answer it. If you don't decide right now, your appetite will consume all of it. I walked into my office this morning. This is an unplanned story. This is a free one, okay? I walked into my office this morning. On my desk is a bag of party-size peanut M&Ms. For my birthday, I just got a family-size bag. And when I get a shareable bag, it means my right hand and my left hand. You know what I'm saying? There's a party-size bag. Corey walks into my office this morning, and she goes, "Don't people realize you have a serious problem?" And I don't eat the whole bag at one time. I open the bag, and then every time I make a round through the kitchen, for some reason, M&Ms end up in my hand and my mouth. And before long, without a plan for the M&Ms, guess what happens? They're gone. I'm like, what happened to all my M&Ms? Enough said. If you don't make a plan for how you will use your stuff, your appetites will consume it all. And it'll be gone. Your story will end with you. And that would be the most tragic thing today. Your stuff will be here. Your legacy is not attached to stuff. Your legacy is attached to stories. And stories are attached to real people in real time that you're loving and encouraging and building into. And every single one of us can do it. But you have to start with that vision. What will I do with what I have? Decide what % of your income you will live on right now. Like, we can talk about giving a tithe or 10% to the church and putting away 10% into your savings. And if you don't know, every single person lives on a percentage of their income. Every single one of us do. It just depends on what % you're willing to do what with. And when I don't have a plan, 100% of it will go away. Like, I have this guy shows up to my house every single month. His name's Bill. Bill gets most of my money most of the time. And if Bill doesn't get my money, Unc comes over. Do you know Unc Sam? Unc Sam gets a portion of my money all the time. You live on a percentage of your income. It just depends on what percentage you're going to live on. And if you don't decide, you will waste it all. It'll just go. And it may go to stuff that you want it to go on, but is it going to stuff that matters to eternity? Is it doing kingdom good? That's what you have to ask. 100% of what you have becomes an opportunity for greater impact. You may still have to pay Bill and Sam, just like me. But when you decide to be a means that will go beyond yourself to turn your stuff into stories, 100% of what you have becomes an opportunity for greater impact. For some of us in the room, that conversation is right and real because we already believe in Jesus. Maybe others of us in the room, it begins with going, will I even give my life to God to start this journey of making an impact with everything else? It really begins with going God first and living into eternity. Whether that's in my own soul and saying yes to Jesus as my Lord and Savior, or it comes to saying yes to Jesus as a managing steward of his stuff to do good in the world. But you have to decide. You are not invited to not decide, and that's not my invitation. That's from the Lord. What will you do with what you have? We will all give an account for that one day, believers and unbelievers. But today is the day that you have to decide, will I live beyond myself and turn my stuff into stories that last for eternity?